By August of 1931, the inland heart of China disappeared under a restless, churning ocean, creating a massive, sudden inland sea, a footprint covering over 180,000 square kilometers, roughly the size of England and half of Scotland combined, entirely submerged. This deluge swallowed entire cities and agricultural hubs, directly affecting 52 million people. When the waters finally receded, an estimated 2 to 4 million of those people were dead. It remains the deadliest natural disaster of the 20th century. We tend to categorize events of this magnitude as unpredictable acts of God. We assume a catastrophe of this size requires a sudden, unforeseeable rupture in the natural order. The disaster unfolded as a chain reaction of 3 distinct forces: a meteorological trigger, a human-engineered amplifier, and a geopolitical executioner. To understand how millions of people lost their lives, we must look past the rain itself. Instead, we must examine how generations of human engineering inadvertently weaponized a river system against the very people it sustained. The Yangtze Basin operates on a harsh but reliable seasonal rhythm. Deep winter freezes lock up moisture in the western mountains as ice and snow. When spring arrives, that ice melts, swelling the rivers downstream just in time to meet the East Asian monsoon, a heavy seasonal rain system locally known as the plum rains. People living along the Yangtze and Jello rivers were accustomed to this cycle, but in July of 1931, an exceptionally massive spring meltwater surge coursed down the mountains and collided with a monsoon season of extreme, relentless aggression. This data visualization shows the sheer volume of that collision. In an average year, the Yangtze Basin expects to be hit by 2 cyclonic storms. In July 1931 alone, they were hit by 7 of them. The region absorbed the equivalent of 18 months of average rainfall, compressed into a single 30-day window. While this volume of water was catastrophic, the death toll suggests a force more complex than a storm. The rain had exposed a landscape trap that was centuries in the making. For thousands of years, local farmers reclaimed natural wetlands to build their villages and rice paddies. To protect these vulnerable investments, they constructed an intricate system of earthen dikes designed to tame the flood pulses of these massive rivers. Look at this cross-section of a channelized river. In a natural system, rivers drift and shift, depositing silt across a wide, flat floodplain. But when you lock a river between dikes, all the heavy silt it carries down from the mountains gets trapped in the channel. The river cannot flush it out, so the silt deposits on the bottom, physically raising the riverbed. Dredging a river of this size by hand is nearly impossible. So generation after generation, engineers applied a dangerously simple fix. As the riverbed rose, they just built the earthen walls higher. By the time the summer rains arrived in 1931, the bottom of these rivers no longer sat in a valley. The riverbeds themselves were physically suspended in the air, held behind earthen walls higher than the rooftops of the millions of people living below. When the earthen walls finally gave way under the weight of the storms, the water dropped out of the sky. It fell from the suspended riverbeds, violently reclaiming the plains and the communities below. Famed American aviator Anne Morrow Lindbergh flew survey missions over the disaster zone that summer in a Lockheed Sirius seaplane. She noted that looking down, the terrain resembled a deep, wide, and horribly still body of water that looked as though it would stay forever. The localized engineering designed to keep farmers dry had destroyed the natural resilience of the landscape. By forcing the rivers into suspended aqueducts, humanity amplified a severe seasonal flood into an unsurvivable catastrophe. Despite the violent cascading failures of the dike system, the initial inundation was not the primary killer. Of the millions who died, only about 150,000 people actually drowned. The true executioners were microbial. The floodwaters destroyed sanitation systems and created massive stagnant inland seas. Millions of displaced refugees were forced onto whatever dry hills or remaining dike walls they could find. In these hyperdense, unsanitary camps, waterborne diseases like cholera, typhus, dysentery, and malaria tore through the population. Saving these refugees required a massive, coordinated logistical response. But the nationalist government, under Chiang Kai-shek, was paralyzed. They were attempting to assert control over a fractured country while facing overlapping existential crises. The government established a National Flood Relief Commission, but their funding evaporated immediately. The global Great Depression had tanked the bond market, making international borrowing nearly impossible. Domestically, the ongoing Chinese Civil War turned the relief effort into a combat operation. Ships carrying wheat upriver were regularly attacked or hijacked by rival factions. Then came the final fatal blow. On September 18th, the Japanese military invaded Manchuria. Faced with an aggressive foreign invasion, the Chinese government was forced to pivot its limited resources away from humanitarian rescue and toward sheer military survival. The floodwaters trapped the population, but the collapse of the state sealed their fate. The millions who died of starvation and disease in the winter of 1931 were victims of a geopolitical system that had completely broken down. In the immediate aftermath, 1.1 million laborers were organized into a monumental relief project. Over 6 months, they reconstructed nearly 2,000 kilometers of dikes, but they simply rebuilt them exactly as they were before the rain started. They restored the fragile status quo, treating the symptom instead of the underlying disease. The consequences of failing to adapt were swift. The Yangtze broke its banks again just 4 years later in 1935, and again in 1954, claiming hundreds of thousands of additional lives. However, the deep historical trauma of the 1931 disaster planted a seed. It galvanized political will to conquer the Yangtze River once and for all, a vision that would culminate decades later in one of the most ambitious engineering projects in human history, the Three Gorges Dam. Completed in 2012, the dam serves as the final evolution of China's hydraulic cycle. It is designed to hold back the flood pulses and control the river's discharge. It is an awe-inspiring feat of mega engineering, though it remains highly controversial for its ecological impact and the displacement of over 1 million people. The 1931 China floods provide a stark historical warning. When humanity builds its existence on deeply engineered landscapes, we sign a high-stakes contract with nature. We can redirect the water, and we can raise the walls. But if those systems ever fail, nature